Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Claimed. Today, we have in the house, I guess, Danielle, I should call you our resident astrologist. Well, you've definitely been my resident astrologist because my life has been so crazy in the last couple of months. And I told of my girlfriends and everyone I know that, I signed up for an astrology session with you. And this is how you know that my life isn't going very well. And so we had our session, I believe last week or the week before. So Danielle, I think you've been on my podcast once or twice already, once, I think. And this I think was like our third consultation or something like that. And you know this about me that I am quite a skeptic when it comes to astrology in general. I know that there's something to it for sure, but I'm not someone who'd like even after our session, I kind of scanned through the email and that was kind of it. Maybe that's what I needed, but I'm not someone who's going to go and this and this. And like, as soon as you start talking to me about planets, you kind of lose me a little bit. And the constellations and the Jupiter and the angles and stuff like that.
Right.
But why I thought I should invite you to the podcast is because, and obviously this contributed to why I say the last couple of months have been difficult, because all the clients or the women who I work with, they've also come to me with a lot of these like big life questions and things aren't working, and a lot of them complaining about work has been really stressful. I'm like, what's going on? So I had my consultation with you, and then I thought, well, I'll just bring you on board to tell, because I told all the women, I'm like, she's coming on the podcast. She's going to tell us what the hell's happening because it must be in the stars. You know what I mean? So,
Hmm.
yeah, welcome, Danielle. And
Thank
before
you.
we continue, you're welcome. Before you tell us a little bit about yourself, I want to start with this icebreaker. It's not even a question, but I want to start by this. I noticed you have a quote in your email signature that says, "Nothing can be understood in isolation, only by its relationship to other things." And the quote is by Howard Sasportas. So let's
Hmm.
start with that. And why is that quote at the signature of your email?
Well, this really the foundation of the work that I do is focusing on the relationship of who we are with life around us. And astrology in its, purest form is like the most fundamental, earliest version of getting to know ourselves and why we're here. And I really feel like it provides a lot of clarity and insight and validation, and really is about the relationship between ourselves and our inner universe, our inner solar system, and all of what makes us who we are. And to give us permission to really be that which we came here to be, but there's another piece in that the relationship of counselor or astrologer and the client is really what can provide a lot of healing, just to be witnessed in that space and to be seen in the very unique way that astrology allows for is so magnificent. I mean, it's really what led me to this path so many years ago. So Howard Sasportas is no longer on this plane, but he was one of my guiding lights in my self-study of astrology over the years. So he's a famous astrologer there. Yeah.
Wow, interesting. Okay, so I've got a lot of questions
Yeah,
based on
sure.
what you just shared. But before we do that, just yeah, to tell us who you are and what you do. Well, we obviously know you're an astrologer, but tell us who you are and yeah, just
Yeah.
give us the elevator pitch, your bio.
Sure, sure. Yeah. So my name is Danielle Polgar, and I have been an astrologer for, about 15 years now. I've been studying astrology for almost 20 years, but have been practicing professionally for, for 10 years really, but have been deep, deep in study for about 15 years. And so I work with astrology in a counseling capacity. So not just in the sense that I read people's charts, which of course I do, but I also help people understand themselves a little bit deeper by using the chart as a background or a touchstone that we always refer to in our sessions together. And I'm a mother of two children. I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I'm married to a chiropractor and holistic doctor and energy healer. So healing, wholeness, wellness is really kind of my MO in this lifetime. And I'm just really excited to share that with people.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so So how did you get into this work, Danielle? That's what I'm curious about because you said, you mentioned self study. And, I think why I connected with you is because you struck me as a woman who's very down to earth and quite, you're a normal human. I think when we
Yeah,
think about astrologists, we think about these people who like look at the stars and are kind of on the woohoo plane, you
right,
know? So, yeah, but when I talk to you, you're like, a normal woman, with
right.
with the everyday struggles and parents and the parents-in-law and things like that. So, and two children, and but yeah, you struck me as a very grounded woman in that way. So, how does a woman like you become an astrologist?
Well, it's definitely not something I thought I was going to be when I was growing up. I was definitely aware of the fact that I came here to help people at a very young age. And it wasn't until my late 20s during my Saturn return, which is an experience that happens between ages 27 and 30 when individuals are essentially initiating into adulthood. And I mean, it was one of the most tumultuous experiences of my life. I was previously married and unhappily so, and I was really lost. And I was gifted an astrology reading by a friend at the time, and it really just astounded me. I was like, how is it possible that this person can see all of that about me? And I had already dabbled in astrology for a couple of years, even actually since I was in middle school, like age 12. But after I had that reading, it was just like this drive to know this information. And at the time, I was also pursuing my master's degree in counseling. So eventually, once I graduated and I left my previous marriage, I wove, I took the two, astrology and counseling, into a blend of a unique offering. And I've been doing that ever since. And along the way, I have basically been teaching myself through, various readings from other astrologers and kind of mentoring with people individually, but also teaching myself through books and, yeah, just exploring myself through the lens of astrology and getting to know myself through that, but also just in my practice of getting to know people and how this stuff actually lives through people's lives.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes, obviously by now, not by now, you have seen the power of it and the truth of it, right?
Yes.
As we talk about astrology, I remember, so I don't know if you know about this book, The Game, which is all about
Mm,
like pickup artists and things like that, about men learning how to pick up women and get them in bed and everything. And so I just finished that book. I've been reading that book for professional purposes. Okay,
sure.
and there's that. String and I were laughing. There's that. Like at the end of the book there is like a glossary of acronyms, or like I guess secret phrases or whatever, and there's a secret phrase there that's called and by the way, I don't recommend reading that book to anyone who is not probably professionally doing dating relationships, because it could just fuck you up in so many ways about and whatever. Yeah, women, do not read that book. Why I'm mentioning it is because at the end of it, one of the glossary um, words was chick crack. So a chick crack is basically something that only women resonate with, or not resonate, but only it's a cheek crack, like a crack, like a drug or whatever, just for women. And what's included in there, and the definition goes something like this: things that only women are interested or passionate about, and that includes tarot cards, astrology, crystals, and things like that. So so it's really interesting that I'm talking to you now. My husband would be like rolling his eyes that I'm talking to you on my podcast and saying, "Ah, chick crack," Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm I'm mentioning this here because obviously being married to someone like him, because he's super grounded, down to earth. Even the work that I do, embodiment, he doesn't understand what I'm doing, although it's very grounded. But then when I mention astrology, he just kind of pretends. When he found out, he saw on my calendar astrology session, he just literally pretended that he didn't see it there. It's like, chick crack, same thing as her tarot
Mm-hmm.
cards and everything. But obviously, when you're married to someone like that, and we both listen to people like Joe Rogan and Jordan B. Peterson. So all of these people, they wouldn't be talking to astrologists, because I guess
Right.
Well, it is kind of, I mean, I know you would probably call it a science, right? And I've heard from different, sources and things that astrology indeed is something that changed people's lives. And I can see, so I'm in between this kind of, as I said, I'm a skeptic, I'm in between this kind of like more to this side where it's like, what is this thing about astrology and stars and shit, But at the same
Yeah.
time, a part of me has been, well, chick crack, right?
Yeah.
A part of me has been drawn to this, like, ooh, I am an Aquarius. And so when I had a session with you last week or a couple of weeks ago, I was like, this is so accurate. But I was sitting there and thinking, is she saying, like, because you lost me with all the planets and charts. And I'm like, is she
Hmm.
saying that to like kind of explain? So I don't know, does she know this, like what you said, right? When you got a chart, when you got that first reading, you're like, how does this person know a lot about me? So it's
Hmm.
weird. It's kind of on the borderline of magic or something, or the star, like
Yeah.
that connection. I think what you said, what I'm leading to the question of when you said getting to know ourselves and why we're here, astrology provides that.
Uh-huh.
Like my mind cannot comprehend this, because I
Yeah.
guess the universe, like the connection between, um how shall I put it, astrology, not astrology, astronomy, so to say, because they're different things, right? The universe, science, all of the practical stuff that is just there, right? How does that influence, um how do I get to know myself as a human on earth, and why am I here? At the same time, I know astrology is something that's been studied for thousands of years, so I can't deny it. But at the same time, I can't really accept that, because to me, like the gap is so huge and big, and I don't understand it. Like I don't understand how I am an Aquarius because I was born in February or whatever, and
Hmm.
then while I read things about me, in the horoscope, like it's clear that I'm. So I don't even know how to tackle this, or I don't know where you want to start with that.
Right. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, even starting with the quote that I have on my email, right? Like nothing can be understood in isolation, only by its relationship to other things. So most people know about their sun sign in astrology, right? This is
Mhm.
my sun. And they're limited in that perspective. They look in horoscopes, they say, well, yeah, some of that's true. I'm not sure. But we're made up of so much more. We're such complex beings. And there's many different characters within our own internal play, you could say, right? And what astrology does is really just the study of cycles and the study of nature and natural forces. So you could say, in a way, how do you respond to spring? How do you respond to summertime? Who are you at that time of year, right? And and it's that relationship that gives us information about your role or what your experience is from this plane, right? Like from Earth, this perspective. So when we're looking at a birth chart, we're not just looking at your sun sign. That's a huge piece of it, but it's also just one of many parts. I feel like that's why a lot of, in the pop culture and maybe even certain men are like, oh, what is this nonsense? They probably haven't experienced having their chart read to look further within to say, well, what is this? Let me actually investigate this deeper. And then to be witnessed, to be seen, to be reflected in such a way, not because I'm some magical psychic, but because I'm reading a language that has been handed down to us like for generations, eons. It's the first religion, you could say, honestly, and in terms of our belief systems and trying to understand who we are, what we're doing here, what this bizarre human experience is. And it's a language of symbols, it's a language of archetypes and energies that we all share. But it's the way in which it's all made up and orchestrated that makes us uniquely ourselves, right? So, you might be an Aquarius, but you have, planets and other signs that are going to create a certain type of expression of that Aquarian energy, right? And everybody has Aquarius in them in some way. We all are a multitude of the signs. We're a collection of everything that's, within the chart and all the zodiac signs, but we are also working with certain material in this lifetime. Like some people are really gifted artists, some people are, great writers or great attorneys. We all come in with our unique makeup, and astrology reflects that. So essentially, what I'm doing as an astrologer is not telling people who they are, but I'm reflecting back something that I can see through this language that gives me a more intimate picture into like your internal workings. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. I like how you said it's study of cycles, and it's a language that astrologers, I guess, you're like an interpreter, right? Of
Exactly.
here's the language, and I just interpret. And the first religion, I could totally see that, right? Like being the first religion, belief system, and symbols and archetypes, and you're reflecting back. Now, I guess my next question here, and this is where they roll their eyes and what is this nonsense, is how do you explain it? Like, how do you actually explain that by looking at where the stars or the planets were at my moment of birth, not sets my destiny, but that explains who I am and why I'm here. And then, of course, now knowing a little bit about it as I go through life, the things move like Saturn returns and things like that, that's affecting my life. Like, that question is also, I guess, related to this. Do you call astrology a science
I
or
would
more
say
like an art?
it's an art and a science. Absolutely.
Yeah, both. So
Yeah.
that connects. Like, how does that even happen? you know,
Hmm.
and that takes me back to that, as you said, the first religion or the language. Thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, somebody was sitting there looking at the stars and trying to make sense of it all, or like think about, all right, well, here's the universe and here are the stars, and maybe they started to notice some things. This is where the skeptic part of me sits there and be like, okay, how does that even happen or relate to us? And like the birth, because you gotta obviously know your birthday, the place in the world you were born, and then the time. Basically, these are the things. And then I can tell you something interesting, that when I was giving birth to my children, especially my first one, she was scheduled for, I think we talked about this on our first episode, where this is where this whole thing, I really started to question it in a way. No, yeah, I guess question it, because I realized, like, oh, well, I'm scheduled for an induction, or let's say if you're scheduled for a cesarean section, you can kind of like, I guess, plan, what time, what day, and you can like even fly across the world to give birth to your
Right.
child. Because
Hmm.
like I could have a consultation with you and say, Danielle, what are the most favorable conditions? What is the place in the world, and what's the most favorable time and day for my child to be born, to be like, I don't know, the next Elon Musk, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah,
Sure.
like that's what I want to know. I want to like give birth to an Elon Musk. Like, how do I do that? So
Right.
what do you say to that?
Well, I mean, the way that I describe this, right, is that this is a snapshot of what was happening in the sky at the moment of your birth, which essentially gives us a signature or an imprint of certain type of, you could even say music. Like this is how the music is orchestrated or organized, right? And I think a lot of this skepticism, which I think is totally wonderful to question this stuff. We should be questioning everything we're told, especially now as Pluto moves into Aquarius, definitely. Um,
I love
but, that being said, like we are conscious beings, right? So where did consciousness arise? And even the question, and this is like really trippy, right? Even the fact that we question, like, what is that? What is this like need to know and gain information or know what we're doing or know why we're here? What is that drive? So probably the origins of astrology and astrologers and their relationship. I mean, we were living out in wilderness. We weren't living in these little boxes and communicating on technology. This was a way in which people could make sense of and give meaning to their experience. And through the evolution of consciousness, we've been able to discover new planets like Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto that are essentially symbols for our evolution and consciousness. They become part of the language that we begin to speak over time. And so it's like the chicken or the egg, as above, so below, as within, so without. It's not necessarily that the planets are causing something, but they serve to reflect something within ourselves so that we can see ourselves clearly, so that we can know ourselves, kind of like looking in the water and seeing our reflection, right? Back in the day before we had mirrors. Oh, I'm here. Oh, I exist. Oh, I have a purpose. And what is that? I can look to the stars. I can look around me. I can feel within me what that story is going to be about. I also don't have to know anything about it, but we do have this tool. Like parents often say, I wish I had a book to understand my child, or a manual, a user's manual. And it's like, well, you have an astrology chart. So that should give you some insight into the spectrum of expression of what this child may bring to the table, what their experiences might be, how they might be responding to life around them. Does that resonate? Does that land?
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. I guess that's why I think astrology is put into this category of, energy healing, or even tarot card reading, stuff like that. It's a tool that helps us, as you said, get to know ourselves better. For example, when we talk about energy healing or tarot cards or whatever, like I understand that. Although I might not agree with everything, or like I understand energy, right? Like everything is energy. I have energy. I can produce energy. My energy is low, right? Like tarot cards, I can take them, like I can feel them. So all of these kind of modalities that help us understand ourselves and kind of what do we do with it, because they're here and I can kind of sense them and whatever, they make sense to me. I might not agree with them, but they make sense to me. Now, astrology is something that is, oh, wow, like there's so much here that obviously I'm like, what is a book that I can read about it or whatever? This is something that's literally like, I'm imagining we are on planet Earth, and then there's a solar system, and there's planets and there's stars around us and stuff. How does that influence me as a tiny little human being on planet Earth? And there's like, what, 8 billions of us? Do you know what I mean? That thought, that connection is so beyond my, like, how does that, all of that, the solar system, the universe, how does that influence my life, and how am I and who am I? Can you, what's the explanation
Right.
to
Well,
that?
I would also ask you, how does it not, right? We're on a planet that is a certain distance from this star called the sun that heats this place up and essentially makes life possible. That in itself is huge, right? And we also have the moon, which is responsible for the gravitational pull in our, oceans, and creates the tides and the waves. And even as women, we cycle alongside the cycle of the moon, which is 28 to 30 days, right? And in astrology, the moon is representative of, or reflects, the feminine nature, right, of a human being, the emotional nature, how someone experiences the cycle and the ebb and flow of their emotions, right? Energy and motion. I think it's to simplify it. I mean, for one thing, this is a psycho-spiritual model. I look at it very much in a psychological capacity. You could say these planets are parts of ourselves, or archetypes, patterns of consciousness, characters in our life story. Psychologically speaking, we have an inner child, we have an inner parent, we have our inner critic, right? That's all reflected in the chart as well. So this is just an externalization of that, essentially. To take it a step further, we are nature. We're not separate from it. So there's nothing outside of us that isn't part of us in some way, right? We are in this harmonious relationship with the seasons, with the cycles of life. And this brings us back into that relationship of watching how things change within us. Like, what is our relationship with change as we move through all of these seasons, which, from my perspective, Western astrology anyway, that's how it is oriented, is through the seasons, right? So we will follow the sun and the light and the energy around each season, and what that means for us personally is going to be very different from person to person. Again, like I feel like it comes back to this relationship that we have of watching who we are in time and space, paying attention to cycles and patterns, and even historical events where, for example, we could say, like, the last time Pluto moved into Aquarius was in the late 1700s, 1770s, when there was like revolutions happening. So that's going to bring in a certain kind of quality to the moment in the collective fields as a species even.
Yeah, no, it does make sense because, I think my question was from a perspective of, and that's what we humans do, we think like, oh, I'm going to create rockets and fly them to Mars. And it's that whole, like, the human is super powerful and can do anything. And it's all in the mind and all, like, conquered nature in that sense. And that obviously, I think you'd agree with me that, and I do embodiment work and I can see how disembodiment, which is part of uh, living in your head and this whole intellectualization and the time when we have separated from nature, body, connection to the universe or whatever, and went straight into our head. And science, if I can't measure it, can't explain it, can't see it, this very masculine approach, I guess, took
Mm-hmm.
over. I don't know how you call it, disposition that we humans as a culture have, especially obviously the Western world. The Eastern world is a little bit different. So it does make sense when you put it that way, where you're like, well, we are humans and we live on planet Earth, and planet Earth is obviously influenced by by the stars and by the planets, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore we cannot not be influenced by that either, because
Mm-hmm.
we live on planet Earth and we are obviously, like, as women, we are, all humans are influenced by the moon, whether you notice it or not. So
Yeah.
okay, yeah, it does make sense when I think about that. I mean, it's so weird that I ask you this question, yet I had a session with you, 2 weeks ago and two more before, when I had big decisions in my life. So Danielle, can you give us a snapshot in terms of what the hell is happening right now, I guess in the last 2 months, which what I started with this episode with. Personally in my life, it's been huge. Where literally, I think I wrote to you and we spoke on the phone, where I said everything, like, everything everywhere all at once, and
Mm-hmm.
everything's falling apart. And I think I've overcome that now. It still feels like I'm on the precipice of something, creating something new. And we talked about this, like, this is my kind of unique individual journey. But what do you see on maybe like a collective level? I don't know if you can give us some sort of a relationship, because my clients are all women, and
Yeah.
they're looking for committed masculine men, so to say, that they're wanting to be in their feminine, and want to get out of their head and into their bodies and feel safe and surrendered, taken care of. And I wouldn't say that necessarily now they're finding that really, really hard, but I find that there was this collective kind of, a lot of stress and a lot of unease, a lot more
Mm-hmm.
questions to me, a lot of like, how do I do this? I don't understand this. Where I'm like, nothing has changed in the last 3 years. Like, I've had my program for the last 3 years and I literally didn't change anything. So why there's much more questions, why there's more stress? So if you can give us maybe a snapshot of what's happening now and maybe how we can explain it or deal with it, or
Yeah.
what are the next steps forward, would be
Yeah.
great.
Sure. Well, collectively, I feel like we've all been obviously in this very tumultuous period of time, even for the past 3 years, with the pandemic and everything that happened. And we're emerging from that, this collective breakdown, if you will, and picking up the pieces of that. And there has been some significant changes astrologically, even just in this past month, that have moved us into a new phase of creation and exploration of, where we're going to take the world. This is really an opportunity for creating the world that we know in our hearts is possible, type of thing, right? And one of those major shifts, I mean, there's 3 of them really, but even maybe 4. One of the major shifts is that the planet Saturn, planet that represents responsibility, maturity, boundaries, structure, that just moved into the sign of Pisces for the next 3 years. And that is a period of time in which we are all going to, be able to or called to bring our inspiration into form in some way, committing to a spiritual path, being of service to a social situation, or grounding our ideals in some capacity. It's a much different, I won't even say it's much more comfortable, but I'll say it's a much different expression for Saturn to be in the sign of Pisces, rather than where it was for the past 3 years in Aquarius, which is more about isolation, control, battling authority and freedom and all of that. So we are kind of putting that behind us in that sense, in the lessons that we're going to learn with Saturn, in the restructuring that's going to happen. And of course, this is all going to take place in a different area of people's lives based on their personal natal chart. But that's a really important shift that started on March 7th. And then we also have the Pluto, the planet of power, manipulation, control, death, and rebirth, is just moved into Aquarius, where it will be until mid-June. And we're getting a preview now of what Pluto in Aquarius will be about. And this is a generational experience where we get to now see how we can transform our relationship to technology, where over the past, since 2008, when Pluto moved through Capricorn, we really got to see the death and rebirth of society as we know it. Dismantling of societal structures, governments, institution, education, and getting to see the underbelly and the corruption that was there. Now we will see that in terms of how that applies to Aquarius themes, groupthink, the individual versus the herd, finding our unique genius, AI, and being, either ultra tech or ultra human, like maintaining our humanity within that. So we're getting a preview over the next 3 months in terms of that. And then in November of 2024, Pluto will move back into Aquarius and it will stay there for 20 years. So we're not quite done with this whole dismantling of societal structures just quite yet, especially because the United States has its own birth chart and it's in its Pluto return, which is like the downfall of a civilization, essentially. And we're a young country here. So, we have a lot to learn and restructure in terms of how we do things as a culture, and how that's going to influence the world, obviously, since we're all sharing the same planet. And another planet just changed signs at the end of March. Mars, planet of action, motivation, energy, and direction, was in the sign of Gemini for 8 months, I think, since September, which is a really long time for Mars to spend in a sign. It usually only spends about 6 weeks. And Mars was not so comfortable in that sign. Plus, we had a retrograde in there, which means that the energy was not moving forward, but moving backward. And there was a lot of chaotic stirrings happening during that time for a lot of people. Now we're moving into Cancer, which is more of an emotional expression, moving from our emotional centers rather than from the mind, really tapping into things from the past and seeing where our triggers are being activated so that we can look at them and heal them. And this, of course, don't pay attention to all the language I'm using when I'm saying this, but the nodes of the moon will shift into the signs of Aries and Libra, which is all about me in relationship to other people. So I think this will be a really important time for a lot of your listeners and a lot of your clients, because we're entering into a territory of resolving codependent patterns and engaging in constructive conflict, leaning towards harmony and peace or not, and just focusing on that me-we axis. Like, where do I fit in a relationship? How can I meet my needs first, fill my cup up, and then give from that place? So in short, there's a lot shifting, and we're kind of beyond this reconstructive phase, or at least a stage of it, so that we can start to put some of this back together, like really integrate during this next phase, this next year, and bring something new forward that is going to move us to a new place, in ourselves, of course, but within the world at large.
Really interesting. So, to everyone listening, what would be some, I guess, practical steps or questions we can ask ourselves so that we can move forward in a powerful way?
Well, for one, with Saturn and Pisces, trust your intuition, like really, really learning to lean into that more, and tuning into that, knowing that we have in our body that moves us forwards and towards something, and to also bring our dreams or our inspirations into form in some way, to play with that and to be creative in whatever ways we feel inspired. With Pluto in Aquarius, this is really about empowering ourselves to embody our inner genius in some way, bringing that forward. The world needs your unique offering that only you can share in order to evolve us to the next level. Looking at shadow material, your fears, whatever is kind of in your way and clogging up your ability to move forward. Like, this is the time to really activate something within yourselves that is like, I don't really care what everybody else is doing. I'm going to follow my authentic self here. And then over the next 6 weeks, at least until mid-May, Mars is going to be in Cancer. So again, this is really focusing on our emotional responses, our sensitivities, and seeing how we can make decisions from that gut instinct, literally like that belly knowing, also. So it's kind of like an amplification on a theme here with the Saturn transit through Pisces, which is also a water sign. And then, going into the summer it's just going to be a real big shift for everybody, where things really start to pick up and manifest. It might get a little chaotic, and that's okay. Like, really trusting that we have the resources and tools available, and we can also lean on other people to support us through whatever emerges, because that's also going to be necessary moving forward, that we understand that we are not isolated beings, that we need each other to survive.
As you were speaking these kind of recommendations, I was thinking like, well, that's kind of the advice that's always helpful, no matter where you are. Do you know what I mean? And then I'm like, does this advice or recommendation change? I mean, I'm assuming it does change as things are happening, let's say in the next 6 months. Like if we were to have the same conversation, let's say 6 months from now, you'd probably be seeing different, I guess, planets and how things are moving, and you'd be giving me a different advice or recommendation on what to focus on. I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Well, also that's why I think it's really important to understand how these influences, you could say, or reflections are operating in one's own personal experience. Because yes, there's a collective experience that we're all having, but we're all responding to it in our own unique ways. And it's going to impact certain areas of our life. Like one person might be having a restructuring of their marriage, or another person might have a restructuring of their business. And that those two things are very different experiences. So it's both a collective experience and, the macro and the micro happening simultaneously.
Yeah, for sure. Oh my God, there's just so much to talk about. I mean, obviously there's like whole astrological podcasts and
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
things and apps and yeah, but I wanted to thank you so much, Danielle, for coming on again and addressing my coming from a skeptic questions. And yeah, just giving us a little bit of an update. And I guess when I had my consultation with you, I just felt a sense of relief. And I guess it's like, well, this is what's happening and it's happening for everyone. And I guess it gave me this thing of like, all right, well, at least something can explain it,
Yeah.
and I, whether you this for some people it is religion that they rely on, for some for like their faith, right? For some people it is astrology, for some people it's that, but there's always this thing that, I mean, I don't want to compare religion to astrology, but there's this thing of like something bigger than me is
Yes.
happening at the moment, and how can I tap into that, right? Like how
Hmm.
can I use the information or get curious? That's what I did, right? Like I'm not religious, but I guess in moments of, so when this whole shitstorm was happening for me, I started to pull more tarot cards and I started to do more of my practice and write. And that's why obviously I reached out to you, because whenever shit's going down, I feel like as humans, well, particularly that's true in my case, I started to like look for ways that I can connect more spiritually, and just fall back onto things that perhaps are not explainable, because all of that is like no, not necessarily scientific, if that makes sense. So
Oh, it
yeah.
does. I mean, I think what you're speaking to is also just this innate sense that when things aren't comfortable, that we feel like something is wrong and this can't be happening, shouldn't be happening, and whatnot. And we want to be in control. And what has helped me, and I know has helped so many people, my clients, is just knowing that there's this anchor of meaning and a sense of timing. Like, I'm in
Hmm.
a process right now. This isn't going to last forever. This is what it's about. This is how I apply it to my life. This is how I can work with it. So instead of working against it, right? And that way, we can have a little bit more of an easeful experience in this very bizarre human journey that we're on, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks, Danielle, so much. I'm sure we'll have you again. Maybe, maybe when another big transition is happening. We'll see.
great.
Thanks so much, Danielle. For everyone listening, how can they find more about you and maybe get in touch with you if they're interested in learning more?
Sure. Well, you can visit my website, which is daniellepolgar.com. And there's information there. You can book a session there, send me a message. I don't really post that much on Instagram, though that might change over the next couple of months. And I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to use Instagram, but I'm intuiting other formats of communication. So stay tuned for that.
Got it. All right. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on here.